So today, we're diving deep into the psychology of trauma. I mean, how does the human mind even begin to cope with the unthinkable? We're going to go on a journey, starting on the historical battlefield and ending up in a much more modern, shared experience of tragedy, all to try and figure out what happens when our entire world just shatters. It all really boils down to this one fundamental question. This one actually came from a Reddit user, but it's something people have wondered about forever. How do regular, everyday people go through the absolute horror of war and then just come back to society? How do they function? I mean, for centuries, right? Commanders, historians, they've all been trying to crack this nut. But the thing is, it's just incredibly difficult to study scientifically. I mean, think about it. You can't exactly run a controlled experiment in the middle of a firefight, can you? So a lot of the time, we're left digging through historical accounts, looking for clues. And that's what brings us to this one historian, S.L.A. Marshall. See, after World War II, he published this book, Men Against Fire, and it dropped an absolute bombshell. It proposed a truly shocking idea about what most soldiers were really doing, or maybe what they weren't doing, in the heat of combat. So here it is. Marshall's bombshell claim was this. He said that as many as 75%, three-quarters, of riflemen in combat did not fire their weapon at the enemy. Just didn't pull the trigger. His argument was that most of us have this deep, built-in resistance to killing another human, a psychological barrier so strong that it holds up even when your own life is on the line.
Wild, right?
Now, this theory had a massive impact on military training, but you can bet it was controversial right from the get-go. The pushback came from two main camps. First, you had the sentimental critiques, people who felt he was basically disrespecting the greatest generation, maybe even calling them cowards. But then there were the statistical critiques, which were, let's be honest, a lot more serious. These critics pointed out that the 75% number, it wasn't hard data. It was just a rough estimate he got from doing informal group interviews, not exactly the gold standard of scientific research. Okay, so Marshall was really zeroed in on the individual soldier's mind, on a far-off battlefield. But trauma isn't just about that anymore. So what happens when the battlefield is an entire society? And what happens when a crisis is so big, so widespread, that it swallows up the very people who are supposed to help us heal from it? Well, a really powerful study from 2023 in the Journal of Clinical Psychology looked at this exact scenario. Researchers talked to 201 Israeli therapists in the weeks right after the October 7th terror attack. And what they were looking at was this incredibly unique and tragic situation where the therapists and their clients, they were all living through the very same national trauma at the very same time. So listen to this. In the study, here's how a client described their experience. A sense of loss of control, loss of trust in others, and in reality. I mean, just a complete shattering of their entire world. Okay, hold that thought. Now listen to how a therapist described their own feelings. The sense that there's no one in the country you can trust. It's almost the exact same thing. The words are nearly identical. And in that moment, in that shared suffering, that line between the healer and the person who needs healing, it just completely vanished. There's actually a name for this. Psychologists call it shared traumatic reality. And it's exactly what it sounds like, that profound, gut-wrenching moment when the helpers, the professionals, are caught in the very same storm as the people they're trying to help. And that professional boundary, that wall, it just crumbles. And the overlap they found, it was just staggering. The study showed that both groups, the therapists and their clients, were reporting almost identical feelings. We're talking deep uncertainty about the future, overwhelming fear, physical exhaustion, like not being able to sleep, a total shattering of trust and any sense of normal routine. It wasn't just similar. It was like they were looking in a mirror and seeing the same suffering. This deep psychological impact, this invisible wound, as it's often called, it's something we've struggled to even find the right words for. For more than 100 years, our language has been playing catch-up, trying to evolve just to keep pace with how we understand trauma. If you go back to the 1910s, during World War I, they called it shell shock or war neurosis. They actually thought it was a physical injury caused by the blast waves from artillery. Then, by World War II, the term changed to battle fatigue, which started to acknowledge the pure psychological exhaustion of it all. Fast forward to after Vietnam, and it became known as post-Vietnam syndrome, really tying it to the unique horrors of that specific war. And then, 1980. This was the big one. This was the turning point. The American Psychiatric Association officially added post-traumatic stress disorder, yep, PTSD, to its big diagnostic manual, the DSM. And this was huge. I mean, for the very first time, this invisible wound was a real, formal, diagnosable condition. And not just for soldiers, but for anyone who went through a major trauma. So that raises the question, who is most vulnerable to this? And the research is pretty clear that the risk of getting PTSD isn't just about the terrible event itself. It's way more complicated. It's this complex mix of factors from your whole life. Things that happened before the trauma, like a history of depression, what happens during the trauma, like if you experience dissociation where you feel detached from reality, and maybe most importantly, what happens after the trauma. Like, do you have a strong support system or are you all alone? That can make all the difference. Okay, so if trauma is the wound, what's the path to healing? Because the story doesn't just end with a diagnosis, right? The other side of this coin, the flip side of trauma, is resilience. It's that incredible human capacity we have to adapt, to bounce back, even after being knocked down by the worst things imaginable. And we actually have a pretty good idea of what resilience looks like in practice. Studies of survivors have pointed to some key traits. Resilient people, they tend to actively cope with stress. They don't just try to avoid it. They're not afraid to ask for help. They lean on their friends and family. And this part is absolutely crucial. They reframe how they see themselves, not as a victim, but as a survivor. And very often they find a new kind of strength in helping other people. And that brings us full circle, right back to those Israeli therapists. Because right there, in the middle of their own shared nightmare, the study found something amazing. They found a new sense of meaning, a purpose in their actions. Using their professional skills to help their clients, well, it actually became a way to help themselves. It was resilience in action, right there in the real world. So all of this leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Whether it's a soldier in the trenches of World War I or an entire society grappling with collective grief, trauma does one thing really, really well. It shatters our sense that the world is a safe, predictable place. So, how do we begin to rebuild? Not just as individuals, but as whole communities. Look, there's no easy answer here. There's no magic bullet. But the search for that answer, that's a constant, vital, and truly global effort. It's reflected in real-world plans, like this protocol for managing psychological crises from Lebanon's National Mental Health Program. At the end of the day, it's the ongoing essential work of piecing a shattered world back together.